Picture this moment of pure satisfaction. I sat there stone-faced as they slid that eviction notice across the mahogany conference table. Without saying a single word, I reached into my briefcase and placed a yellowed 1923 water rights document right next to their legal threats. The color drained from their faces faster than water through a broken dam. What happened next turned 37 luxury homes into waterfront property overnight. Before we dive into this epic takedown, I need to know, which country are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. Are you dealing with similar HOA nightmares where you live? And here's the big question. What would you do if corrupt developers stole your family's land while you were serving your country? Let me know, because your stories fuel these videos. Smash that subscribe button right now, because this revenge story involves federal water law, military engineering, and the most satisfying use of gravity you'll ever witness. The Willowbrook Estates HOA thought they could bulldoze over a combat veteran's family farm while I was serving overseas. These suburban warlords in their golf carts and tennis uniforms had no idea they'd just declared war on someone who builds dams for a living. Stay until the very end, because what you're about to witness proves that sometimes David doesn't need a slingshot. Sometimes David needs a spillway and a whole lot of engineering expertise. My name is Marcus Tank Williams, and at 35 years old, I'm the kind of guy who solves problems with precision engineering and old-school Texas principles. After 2 combat tours as an Army Corps of Engineers specialist, I came home to discover that the real enemy wasn't overseas. It was right here in suburbia, wearing polo shirts and driving luxury SUVs. For 3 generations, my family had owned 53 acres of prime hill country land just outside San Antonio. My grandfather, who everyone called Sergeant Major, bought this spread in 1954 when San Antonio was still a military town where cowboys and soldiers got along just fine. Back then, a handshake meant something, and neighbors helped neighbors during tough times. In 1977, Sergeant Major built what he called his community insurance policy, a beautiful earth-filled dam designed with Army Corps specifications. This wasn't some backyard pond. This was serious water management infrastructure designed to collect seasonal rainfall and help downstream ranchers survive the brutal Texas droughts that could last for years. The engineering was flawless. The paperwork was bulletproof. And most importantly, it came with federal water rights that preceded every shopping mall, subdivision, and strip club in 3 counties, while I was overseas managing water infrastructure in Iraq. Because apparently, I'm the guy you call when you need clean water in impossible places. My well-meaning cousin Rachel was handling the family property. Rachel's a brilliant accountant who lives in Dallas and knows about as much about Texas water law as I know about ballet. She hired Prestige Property Management to handle taxes and maintenance. The bills got paid automatically, but here's where things get interesting. Rachel never questioned why the property tax assessments kept changing, or why the agricultural exemptions suddenly disappeared from the county records. Enter our antagonist. Victoria Vicky Blackwood, 48 years old, HOA president, and the kind of woman who treats subdivision politics like military strategy. Vicky drives a pearl-white Escalade and wears designer activewear to grocery stores like she's perpetually on her way to or from the country club. Vicky's married to County Commissioner Dale Blackwood, which tells you everything you need to know about how things get done in this part of Texas. She's got that particular brand of weaponized politeness that Southern women perfect around age 40, the kind where they'll gut you with a smile and somehow convince you to thank them for it. Vicky made her reputation through community improvement initiatives, which is fancy talk for forcing out anyone whose property doesn't match her vision of suburban perfection. The scent of her expensive perfume can't quite mask the underlying aroma of ambition and entitlement that follows her around like a personal storm cloud. When I rolled down that familiar Caliche Road in August 2023, expecting to see the same rolling pastures and that beautiful lake sparkling in the afternoon sun, What I found instead made my combat-trained blood pressure spike into the danger zone, construction crews, concrete mixers. Survey stakes scattered across my back 40 like some kind of suburban invasion force. The crunch of gravel under my combat boots sounded different this time, angrier, more urgent. I could taste the limestone dust and my own rising fury as I marched toward the construction foreman. "Sorry, buddy," the foreman said, not looking sorry at all while studying his clipboard. "We got all the permits and everything. This is Willowbrook Estates property now, legal and proper." That's when I called the sheriff. Deputy Johnson showed up 20 minutes later, looking uncomfortable as hell, while he explained that the HOA had filed something called an adverse possession claim while I was serving my country overseas. Apparently, when property sits unused for a certain period, and if you can prove you've been improving it, you can sometimes claim ownership through an old law designed to prevent productive land from sitting empty. It's become the favorite weapon of developers and HOAs looking to expand their empires on the cheap. That's when Vicky materialized like a suburban apparition, rolling up in her little golf cart like she owned the place, which, according to the paperwork, she now did. "Your family walked away from this land, sweetie," she said with that smile that could cut glass. "We're just putting it to productive use for the greater community good." But here's what really made my blood boil. I discovered that her construction crews had completely redirected the natural creek that fed Sergeant Major's lake. The water level was dropping every day, and with it, 46 years of careful water management that had sustained 3 downstream ranches through droughts, floods, and everything in between. As I stood there watching the water level drop while construction equipment rumbled across land my grandfather had cleared by hand, Vicky's parting shot hit like a sniper's bullet. "You should have stayed closer to home if you cared so much, soldier boy." That's when I realized this wasn't just about property theft. This was personal. And in my experience, when someone makes things personal with a combat engineer, they usually don't like the results. My first instinct was to fight fire with fire, so I hired the most expensive attorney I could find. Big mistake. This guy quoted me $95,000 just to challenge the zoning modifications and explained that fighting adverse possession claims against politically connected HOAs was challenging at best. Turns out, while I was serving overseas, Dale Blackwood had rammed through an emergency zoning change that transformed my family's agricultural land into prime residential development real estate. The speed of this transformation would have impressed a NASCAR pit crew and was about as legitimate. But here's where my Army Corps training became invaluable. While that overpriced lawyer was shuffling papers and billing hours, I was digging through county records like I was hunting for IEDs in Fallujah. And just like in Iraq, the truth was hiding in the details that nobody else bothered to check. First discovery. Sergeant Major's original 1977 dam construction permits were pure gold. He hadn't just built that dam himself, he'd worked directly with the Army Corps of Engineers for watershed management and flood control. That meant federal jurisdiction. And here's your first knowledge bomb. Any water management system built with federal oversight creates federal jurisdiction that local HOAs cannot override, period. The metallic taste of adrenaline hit my tongue as I realized what I'd found. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. It was a federal case waiting to happen. But the real treasure was buried deeper in the courthouse basement. While photocopying permits at 2 a.m., because that's when combat veterans do their best work, I stumbled across a 1923 senior water rights deed that stopped me cold. My great-grandfather had purchased senior water rights to the entire Willow Creek watershed. These rights were older than the city, older than the county's water authority, older than every single one of those luxury homes sitting on my stolen land. They weren't just stealing my property. They were stealing water that had belonged to my family since before most of these people's grandparents were born. Meanwhile, Vicky was busy playing the victim with Academy Award-level performance skills. She organized an emergency HOA meeting about the dangerous dam structure, complete with a local news crew that she'd obviously contacted in advance. I watched her on the evening news, standing in front of her perfectly manicured lawn, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "We're just concerned about our children's safety. That dam structure looks unstable and we have innocent families living downstream." The beautiful irony? If the news crew had bothered to fact-check, they would have discovered that my dam had passed its most recent safety inspection with flying colors. But truth rarely gets in the way of a good narrative, especially when that narrative involves concerned mothers and dangerous veterans. Vicky's media campaign escalated to digital warfare when she posted on Nextdoor, that digital neighborhood watch where HOA presidents go to flex their petty authority. Her post warned about aggressive property disputes and unstable individuals in the area. She never mentioned my name directly, but in a community this small, everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. The post generated 47 comments ranging from supportive to suspicious, with several neighbors asking pointed questions about water rights and legal procedures that Vicky couldn't answer without admitting what she'd really done. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with cedar pollen hung heavy in the August air as I stood on my front porch each evening, watching their construction crews work overtime shifts. They were racing to finish those foundations before I could secure any kind of legal injunction. Every night, I counted new concrete pours. Every night, the water level in Sergeant Major's lake dropped another inch. That's when I called my old Army buddy Tony Martinez, who now works for the EPA Enforcement Division. 20 minutes on the phone with Tony taught me more about environmental law than 3 hours with that expensive attorney. "Marcus," Tony said, "if they're redirecting a natural waterway without federal permits, that's a Clean Water Act violation. And if your dam has federal jurisdiction." He didn't need to finish that sentence. I started documenting everything with military precision. Trail cameras around the property perimeter, time-stamped photographs of every water diversion, flow measurements at 3 different points along the creek. My sister Rachel called from Dallas, begging me to just take their buyout offer and walk away. But this wasn't about money anymore. It was about the crunch of gravel under construction boots that had no business being on my land. It was about the sound of Vicky's heels clicking across courthouse marble during zoning hearings that should never have happened. It was about the bitter taste of courthouse coffee during late-night research sessions that revealed just how deep this corruption went. Most importantly, it was about that dam. Sergeant Major built it to help the community during dry spells. For 46 years, it had been a source of life for downstream ranchers. Vicky's crew was turning it into a decorative pond for million-dollar McMansions. As I stood there watching, another concrete truck rumbled past my kitchen window. I realized something important. This wasn't going to be one in a courtroom with expensive lawyers and legal briefs. This was going to be one with engineering. Vicky decided to escalate when legal intimidation didn't work. She organized what she called a neighborhood safety patrol, 3 HOA board members in matching polo shirts who parked at my property entrance like some kind of suburban checkpoint. They photographed every visitor, wrote down license plates, and filed reports with the sheriff about suspicious activity. The harassment campaign was textbook intimidation. Noise complaints when I ran equipment during normal work hours, unsightly structures, citations for my perfectly functional farmhouse that had been standing since 1961, and environmental hazards. Reports about my septic system that had passed inspection 6 months earlier. But the real low blow came when Dale used his county position to order a wellness check on me through Veteran Services. Apparently, I was a troubled veteran who might be struggling with readjustment issues. The social worker who showed up was apologetic but thorough, checking boxes on her clipboard while Vicky watched from her golf cart like she was supervising a military inspection. That's when the coordinated bureaucratic assault began. Building, inspector, fire marshal, health department, and animal control all showed up on the same day like some kind of regulatory SWAT team. Each one found minor violations requiring expensive corrections. The building inspector, who happened to be Dale's fishing buddy, declared that my front porch needed $12,000 in foundation work. I recognized this squeeze play immediately. It's the same tactic they use overseas to pressure local officials. Overwhelm them with bureaucracy until they give up and cooperate. But two can play that game. While they were drowning me in paperwork, I was making phone calls of my own. Tony Martinez at the EPA was very interested to learn that Vicky's HOA had never filed the required wetlands assessment before redirecting Willow Creek. Turns out, any development that redirects natural waterways requires federal environmental clearance, even on private property, and the fines for violations start at $75,000 per day. The smell of fresh concrete curing in the summer heat reminded me every morning that I was running out of time. But my research was paying off in ways Vicky never expected. I discovered that their entire development had been built in what the Army Corps classified as a 100-year floodplain. Insurance companies had initially refused coverage until the HOA provided a flood mitigation plan. Their solution? Permanently divert Willow Creek away from the new homes and let it flood my property instead. Here's your second knowledge bomb. Insurance fraud in development projects often carries criminal penalties, not just civil ones. When developers lie about flood risks to get coverage, that's federal mail fraud. The deeper I dug, the more I realized this wasn't Vicky's first rodeo. Her previous HOA in Houston had paid a $3.1 million EPA fine for an identical creek diversion scheme. She'd left town just ahead of federal prosecutors and set up shop here, in San Antonio, looking for new victims. Meanwhile, Vicky was spreading rumors about my mental health and violent tendencies. She hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on my military service and organized a petition demanding the city condemn my property as a public nuisance. "We have children playing in these neighborhoods," she told the San Antonio Express News. "We can't have unstable individuals threatening our community safety." But while she was busy playing victim, I was building alliances. I connected with other HOA victims through online forums and discovered a disturbing pattern. Vicky's HOA had absorbed 8 smaller properties through similar tactics over the past 4 years. Each time, the story was identical: pressure, harassment, bureaucratic warfare, and mysterious zoning changes that always seemed to benefit Dale's construction company. I partnered with my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, whose family vegetable garden had withered since the creek diversion. I met Carlos Santos, whose family ranch had been rezoned out of existence by Dale Blackwood 3 years earlier. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a systematic land grab that had been going on for years. The vibration of heavy machinery through my farmhouse floorboards became a daily reminder of what I was fighting for. Every morning, I watched concrete trucks rumble past my kitchen window. Every evening, I documented the water theft that was slowly killing Sergeant Major's lake. But I was also preparing. I installed water flow meters at the dam outlet and creek diversion points. I calculated the exact volume of water being stolen, 1 to 800 gallons per day, worth $63,000 annually in agricultural water rights. The gritty texture of creek bed sediment. Between my fingers told the story better than any lawyer could. This wasn't just theft, it was environmental destruction on a massive scale. Then I got the certified letter. The city was planning to seize my property through eminent domain for public safety. The hearing was scheduled in just 2 weeks. Vicky's quote in the paper made her strategy crystal clear. Sometimes you have to protect the community from itself. But as I stood at my bedroom window that night, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon, I realized something important. Those weren't just rain clouds building up, they were opportunity. Vicky went nuclear. Dale fast-tracked an eminent domain hearing for just 10 days out, and suddenly the HOA was offering me $240,000 for property assessed at $1.1 million. The message was clear: take the lowball offer or lose everything. The local. Newspaper ran a hit piece that made me sound like a domestic terrorist. "Troubled Veteran Blocks Community Progress" was the headline, complete with a photo that somehow made my farmhouse look like a crack den and me look like I hadn't slept in weeks. But Vicky's master stroke was the photo op. She staged it perfectly. 20 concerned mothers holding children near my property line, with a professional photographer capturing their worried faces while my farmhouse loomed menacingly in the background. The Facebook post went viral with the hashtag #ProtectOurKids. "Our children deserve safe neighborhoods," she told the Channel 12 news crew, "not whatever trauma he brought back from war." You know what? She was right about one thing. I did bring something back from war. I brought back the ability to recognize when someone's trying to steamroll you with propaganda and the engineering skills to do something about it. Tony Martinez called with information that changed everything. The EPA had opened a federal investigation into Willow Creek diversions based on my initial complaint. But here's the kicker. Vicky's previous HOA in Houston faced that $3.1 million fine for the exact same scheme. Federal environmental crimes follow individuals even when they move to new jurisdictions. While Vicky was playing victim on social media, I was discovering that her entire financial house of cards was built on fraud. The HOA's construction loans were tied to inflated property values, and the banks had required guaranteed water access for loan approval. If those water rights reverted back to me, their rightful owner, the entire development would become financially underwater. The taste of bitter irony wasn't lost on me. They'd stolen my water to make their land valuable, and now their own greed was going to drown them. Vicky's panic was starting to show. She offered me $600,000 cash, no questions asked, 48-hour deadline. When I refused, she flew to Dallas to approach my cousin Rachel with some sob story about her brother's mental health issues. That backfired spectacularly. Rachel might not know Texas land law, but she knows her family. She called me laughing. "Marcus, some crazy woman in tennis clothes just offered to help with my troubled veteran cousin. I told her if she contacts our family again, I'm calling the FBI." But while Vicky was busy making enemies, I was making allies. I partnered with environmental attorney Amanda Cruz, who specialized in pro bono water rights cases. Together, we formed a coalition with downstream ranchers who'd been affected by the creek diversion. Carlos Santos brought historical documentation, showing his family had used creek water for cattle since 1889. Mrs. Rodriguez provided photographs of her grandfather's farm from the 1940s, fed by the same creek that was now feeding Vicky's decorative water features. The local Audubon Society was particularly interested to learn that the creek diversion had destroyed critical nesting habitat for several protected bird species. Turns out, killing protected wildlife while committing water theft tends to get federal attention real fast. During my nighttime reconnaissance, old habits from the Army, I discovered something beautiful. Sergeant Major's Dam wasn't just a simple earthwork structure. The original 1977 design included an emergency spillway system with hydraulic gates that hadn't been opened since 1983. The hollow echo of water flowing through those underground spillway channels during my midnight tests told me everything I needed to know. The mechanism was still functional, and it was designed for exactly this situation: controlled flooding to restore natural water flow patterns. I calculated the water volume needed to restore Willow Creek to its original path: 3.2 million gallons. The dam was currently holding 3.6 million gallons thanks to recent rainfall. The math was perfect, but the timing had to be precise. Using my drone for aerial reconnaissance, I mapped the exact locations of those new home foundations relative to the original creek bed. 7 houses were built directly in the historical flood channel. 4 more had basements below the seasonal high water mark. Here's the beautiful part. The construction crews had installed decorative creek beds using concrete and decorative stones. They looked pretty, but they weren't designed to handle actual water flow. Meanwhile, my spillway system was engineered by the Army Corps specifically for flood management. Then Vicky made her biggest mistake. Her crew began installing permanent concrete barriers to completely block the original creek bed. This would make my spillway system useless and permanently destroy the downstream ecosystem. But it also gave me the perfect justification for what I was about to do. The Weather Service was predicting heavy September rains, perfect seasonal cover for emergency dam maintenance. As I stood at those spillway controls at sunset, reading Sergeant Major's journal entry about helping neighbors during droughts, the decision crystallized. Time to open the gates. While digging through dusty courthouse records for the fourth time that week, I found a misfiled document that changed everything. Buried behind a stack of 1979 tax assessments was the original agricultural flood management covenant from Sergeant Major's dam construction. The language was beautiful in its simplicity. Dam operators shall maintain natural seasonal flow patterns to preserve downstream agricultural water rights in perpetuity. This wasn't just permission to manage flooding. It was a legal obligation that superseded any HOA agreements or city ordinances. But Amanda Cruz's investigation uncovered something even more damaging. The HOA's insurance applications contained flat-out lies. They'd claimed no seasonal flooding risk and permanent creek diversion approved by all agencies to secure $52 million in coverage. Here's your third knowledge bomb. When you lie to insurance companies about environmental risks, that's federal mail fraud with mandatory prison time. The deeper we dug, the more the whole scheme unraveled. Dale Blackwood's construction company wasn't just the contractor for the HOA development, he was the primary investor. Every house built on my stolen land put money directly in his pocket. And here's the kicker. He'd never recused himself from a single city council vote that benefited his project. Tony Martinez shared EPA findings that made my blood boil. The creek diversion had killed the entire population of Guadalupe bass, a protected species that had thrived in Willow Creek for generations. Texas Parks and Wildlife had documented the fish kill, but somehow the report got lost in Dale's office before it could trigger federal prosecution. They weren't just stealing land and water, they were destroying an entire ecosystem. But the real smoking gun came from Amanda's banking contacts. The construction loans were secured by fraudulent environmental assessments that claimed the creek diversion was a temporary construction measure. Banks were told the water would be returned to its natural flow once construction was complete. If those water rights reverted to me, the entire development would violate federal lending regulations. The banks could demand immediate full repayment of $18 million in construction loans. That's when I found Sergeant Major's handwritten journals in the farmhouse attic. His 1981 entry broke my heart. Opened spillway today. Helped the Santos Ranch and 4 others get through the dry spell. That's what neighbors do. The dam was never about our family's profit. It was about community service, helping downstream neighbors survive droughts and managing floods to protect everyone in the watershed. Reading those journals, I realized what Vicky had really stolen. It wasn't just land or water, it was 46 years of community cooperation that my grandfather had built one neighbor at a time. 6 months later, justice flowed as naturally as the restored creek. Dale Blackwood pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges and got 4 years in federal prison. Vicky faced $12.3 million in civil penalties and filed for bankruptcy faster than water rushing through an open spillway. The construction company paid $18 million in EPA fines and got banned from all federal contract work. The HOA dissolved completely, and residents formed a new community association focused on environmental stewardship instead of suburban tyranny. My property value? Restored to $1.4 million after the federal environmental designation made it more valuable than any suburban development could. But here's the twist that makes this story legendary. Vicky's Houston case became a federal investigation that exposed a nationwide HOA land grab conspiracy. 47 communities across 8 states filed similar lawsuits. What started as one veteran's fight for his family farm became a movement that changed environmental law forever. The community transformation was the real victory. The restored creek now attracts ecotourism, kayaking, bird watching, and fishing where McMansions were supposed to stand. Mrs. Rodriguez's garden became a demonstration site for sustainable agriculture, and 4 downstream ranches reported their best yields in a decade. The environmental success exceeded every expectation. Protected fish populations recovered to pre-diversion levels within 6 months. The Audubon Society documented 15 bird species returning to restored wetland habitat. My spillway operation became a case study in Army Corps training manuals worldwide. Sometimes the best revenge is just doing your job correctly and watching corrupt bureaucrats drown in their own greed. From my porch each evening, watching that creek flow exactly where it belongs, I'm reminded that some fights are worth everything you've got. But the most beautiful part? Kids now swim in the creek where those McMansions were supposed to be built, splashing in water that flows free because one community decided to fight back. Listen up, warriors. If you're fighting HOA overreach, environmental destruction, or bureaucratic bullying, this story proves you can win. Document everything, find allies, and remember, the law is on your side when you're protecting the land. For future generations. Subscribe now. If this story fired you up, we're building an army of people who refuse to let corrupt officials steamroll our communities. Smash that like button. If you believe corrupt HOAs should face the full force of federal law, tell me in the comments. What's your worst HOA horror story? Which country are you fighting these battles from? Your stories inspire the next video, and I personally read every single comment. Share this video with anyone dealing with property disputes, veteran issues, or environmental destruction. Knowledge is power, and together we're unstoppable. Coming up next week, the suburban mom who used solar panels to shut down the mayor's mansion during his daughter's wedding. That's a story about a different kind of power and how one engineer turned the lights out on municipal corruption. Remember, your voice matters, your vote matters, your property rights matter, and your creek matters too. Water finds a way, justice finds a way, and communities that fight together win together. Willow Creek flows free, y'all. And thanks to viewers like you sharing these stories, corrupt HOAs across America are learning they can't steal from veterans and get away with it. Hit subscribe. Because every subscription is a vote against corruption.